Good morning, my 3D printing family. This is Mark with Upgrades Complete, and the tornadoes from last night have blown through, and I pulled out a CR-10 Mini that I purchased refurbished from Comgrow to put on the table, and it's the same as that one. It came new. This must have just been an open box return, as it had never been out of the package, which was pretty obvious to see. Now, this gives me a chance to answer some of your questions instead of having to diagnose problems, if there are any, or see what the problem was. Now, what do you order when you order your machine? That I get, number one. And the answer is three things. And they're all in this one bag that'll cost you about $20, give or take. Capricorn tubing if you plan to print high temperature materials. Honestly, on a machine like this, your stock Bowden tubing is going to be just fine for PLA, PLA Plus, because it won't melt down. And honestly, the quality control has changed a lot since the explosion of the home-based 3D printing world. This stuff used to be nearly mil spec. Now the QC can be a little iffy. So this can be as good as that at normal temperatures. At higher temperatures, your Capricorn tubing, your PTFE tubing is going to hold up better. That's really it. But also in this bag is your upgraded bed springs and your aluminum extruder. And really that's all we care about is the aluminum extruder and the pneumatic couplers. Now, on your stock CR-10 Mini, this is plastic. And this is a smaller coupler. And now we can replace both with ease. As we're doing the build, it makes things a lot easier because we're also going to rotate that motor around so the plugs are facing the back. And I'm going to show you that. Now, as for bed springs, these actually come with pretty good bed springs. I've been testing them on the last CR-10 Mini I built, and I haven't changed them, and I don't think I will. I did have to on the Ender 3V2, and the CR-10 V3 I did upgrade to the heavier duty ones just because of the bed size, but they seem to hold up well on the CR-10 Minis. Now, when it comes to tramming your bed, once you dial it in and have everything trammed out properly, leveled as what we call it, but it's actually called tramming. Once you tram your bed, you might have to make micro adjustments every few weeks, but really nothing more than that. We're going to get into some of the accessories to throw onto the machine. The most important of which is getting rid of this spool holder that causes jerking and binding and unwinding of your filament. That is standard with all these Creality printers, and I really wish they would just upgrade this thing. The assembly of most 3D printers is pretty straightforward and they're very intuitive. But there are a few things that you're going to want to do first, and that is getting your build surface off of your printer and out of the way. Definitely put it in a safe space. Now that that's off, the next thing you got to do is hold on your bed, flip your machine over to the bedside. Now, all the tools you're going to need are in this bag, and for the sake of new builders out there or people that are new to 3D printing, I am going to use the parts in the bag as opposed to my own tools, just to show you how it's done with what we have available. Now, the reason I flipped this bed over is there's a few adjustments that need to be made right off the bat with any 3D printer. Remember, these are packaged to be transported all around the world. So you want to center your bed. And the first thing you're going to want to do is you have 6 wheels on this machine. Some have 4, some have more. This has 6, 3 of which have a nut. Now this nut is an eccentric nut, and the large size of your wrench will fit this. Now what you're going to want to do, give it a little bit of slight pressure and a wobble back and forth to make sure all your wheels are seated. The next thing that you're going to want to do is the side will have 1, this side will have 2. You're going to take the side that has 2 eccentric nut assemblies, put your wrench on there, and loosen it up and tighten it towards the front of your machine. This one in the back is actually extremely tight, and that's from packaging. But what we're going to do is the same thing essentially. Wow, this one is really, really tight. Okay, now it's free. Now you see when I can turn this by hand, just turn it by hand, that's when you know you're close. So maybe another little bit. Okay. So I turn that knob and the whole assembly is moving. That's when you know your eccentric nut is dialed in. Now see how this one isn't? And this is because they operate on angles. There we go. And yes, this can take you a few times to get it dialed in properly. But this is going to pay off in the long run. See how smooth that is? Now you're going to come around to this side. Well, this eccentric nut's doing nothing. This wheel's spinning, this wheel's tight, this wheel's tight, which means this eccentric nut is off. It's not where it should be. Now you can go towards the front or the back, whatever you prefer to set this up. It really doesn't matter, but you want to tighten it down until you can do the same thing you can do on the other side. Okay, these 3 wheels spin free. These 3 are applying the proper pressure. We know we're good. Now, not necessary, but should be done. In this case, really needed to be done. Tighten those wheels down. Now see this difference? I tighten the wheels down. Every wheel now spins the assembly, and the assembly spins freely, which means all your eccentric nuts are dialed in properly. You're not going to have any bed wobble. What I like to do, since there's pressure on the bed going down, is I center it out. And I will take this opportunity to going in a pattern. Don't go from one corner to the next. Tighten down your bed springs, not over tighten. What we're just doing is preloading the springs with some pressure and getting them as close to dialed in as possible. and we're good to go. I have no doubt that no wobble, beautiful slide, and let's check belt tension, which is actually really good, so it doesn't need to be adjusted. Nice. Okay, so that's a freebie. Now, installation for the... So this is where I go to my trusty iFixit toolkit, because with the Allen keys it comes with, you really can't comfortably get at it without having to take it out and reposition, and take it out and reposition. This is just a time and aggravation saver. And you're going to spin them until snug but not overly tight. Now to show you, the top ones are fine. You can just use the stock wrench if the stock wrench is actually the right size, which it is actually not. This one is. Remember, those are just cheap tools. It's always better to have your own, and there you can see why. The actual end was being a bit of a pain. Now, this is where you're making sure that everything is where you want it. The screws have not thrown anything offline, and I can see that everything is perfectly square, or at least as perfectly square as you can get via eyeball. And you can start tightening down your screws. Pattern it out. Do your outer top and your inner bottom. And we already know the bottom one is a pain to get to. See, this is more of the finish on the screws than the wrench itself. But once that's tight, everything should be tight. Simple, see? Pop your machine back up on end. And you're going to want to make sure everything's level. Now you're going to line up your screws, your T-nuts, excuse me, with the slots in your gantry. Give it a little wiggle wobble, everything will seat fine. Start up top, because you can actually see the nut turn and you know it's gripping. After that point, same thing. Make sure you feel that nut grip, because if these are spinning freely, you're going to have to pull something off to make sure that nut gets a good grip on the inside of the frame. And those you can see good. Yep. See, now this one just did it to me. It did not turn. It didn't rotate. So let's give it another shot by loosening it up and tightening it. And that's better. Now we know it's secured to our gantry. Limit switch is in place. Everything's good there. Now we could just go right on to the assembly from here. This is really it for the printer, besides for plugging everything in, but this is also where our modification, Once you have the limit switch in place, there's not much else to do this machine for it to be done, unless you are doing some upgrades. And we are going to be replacing our extruder. So let's turn this machine around, put it on a good angle to work on the extruder, and while we're at it, we're going to turn this motor. If you notice, your plug attachment is right next to your Z screw, your lead screw. You can rotate this to the back when you take this assembly off, and it just makes things neater, cleaner, easier to get up close to the extruder here. The first thing we're going to be doing is changing out this for the aluminum assembly. But one thing to note, and it's a very important thing to note, is this spring, the stock spring, is shorter than the one that comes with the aluminum assembly. We're going to reuse this spring with the aluminum assembly. That way we have less of a bite on our filament. And even this one may need to be trimmed down a little bit, but more than likely it'll work out just fine. And here we have the new aluminum extruder. And this is a Creality one. I tend to stay within the family of the actual printer I'm dealing with, and there's a lot of knockoffs out there, and I don't know what their specifications are. So far, everything that I've bought that I know is official has worked. And I just unpacked this to make sure every piece is here prior to removing the assembly off of the printer. Now, we're going to be reusing that spring from the printer, so let's get that assembly off, put this off to the side, and I'll show you the parts we're going to be reusing. Now, removal of the extruder assembly is pretty straightforward, as it comes right off. First, you're going to want to take out this screw, which is going to free up your spring assembly. The next part you're going to take out is this screw here. And this is going to free up your armature. And we're getting there. Okay, that screw is out, frees up your armature, and this assembly comes out. This will bring the guide wheel with it, so everything's assembled on here, and we're going to reassemble the new one using this spring. So make sure to put it aside. Next, what you're going to want to do is very simply, oops, wrong size. Remove the 3 additional screws that are holding this extruder into place. The new extruder does come with new screws, so you don't have to worry about them, but at the same time, what you want to do is keep this stuff, because especially if you live in the US, because we don't understand the metric system here for some reason, which makes absolutely 0 sense to me. And you're going to want to hold your motor for this part, and just going to turn that until your motor drops free, and this will come off. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is this gear drive here. You're going to want to remove this, and it has a flat side and two small hex head screws. So we're going to pop them off very quickly. Now you're using your Allen key. This should actually break free extremely easy. Slide that off and that is done. So put that aside, and that's really all you have to deal with, and you'll have your motor. And this is what we're going to have facing the back of the machine now, which will keep it away from our Z-axis. It's just a little thing to do. It makes no difference in the running of the machine, but it makes a big difference when it comes to keeping those wires, those cables organized. Next thing we're going to do is take our Bowden tube pneumatic insert, and we're going to put this into place. Now, a lot of times you're going to see that people will squish in their tube first and then turn this in. That's not the right way to do it. Really, it's not a one or the other. It's not a personal preference when it comes down to it. You can cause mushrooming. Really, that's more on the hot end. But when it comes to this, you can put this in first, since you don't have to worry about any filament gooping through in between where it's being fed in and the Bowden tube. On the other end, on your hot end, that can be a slightly different story. When you're changing that out, yes, sometimes you will want to remove your tip, your nozzle, bring your Bowden tube through, and that also makes sure you don't have any gunk on the inside. And bring your Bowden tube all the way through and leave it over just a hair to when you tighten your nozzle, you have a perfect connection. That's just a better way of doing it. Now, that's really all we have to do besides putting this back on. And what you're going to want to do is line it up, and as you can see, there's a grooved part here that'll line up with the screw that you only undid very, very slightly to get it to move. So we're going to go to that screw and just make sure that both of them are out enough. Okay, now we're going to slide this over and just tighten this down. You can see the gap here. That's where you're going to want to seat this screw into. And that is going to keep you from clicking. Now, don't tighten this stuff up yet, because we don't know the exact distance until we get the assembly back together. So let's go back over to the top of the machine, and I'm going to show you that. Now, again, reassembly at this point is extremely straightforward. You're just going to want to bring your motor up and through. Put your top plate on. Now remember, we're moving that to the back. It's not going to make any difference. You're going to be fine with it. Everything's going to be fine with it. So nothing to worry about there. Now the rest of it is just button head screws and your one flathead. And how you can tell the difference is this one here has an indentation. That's the first one that I like to put in, just because it will stabilize everything exactly on point. And you know you're lined up once you get that in. Now again, don't snug anything down too much, because you're going to have to make adjustments for the other screws. Now the other two button heads just go in these corners. And like I said, that's why slight adjustments are necessary. Alright, it's 2. Your third. And yeah, all in all, it's pretty idiot proof. You're not going to run into any problems. Now, here's where you snug it down. Tighten that one down. And if you saw that gantry just slide down, because I was putting too much pressure down, we're going to talk about that. And that's an adjustment with an eccentric nut. Okay, so all 3 of these are tightened down. I know my gear isn't yet. And that's fine because I can move this by hand. And I want to move the flat section towards the back where it's open for me. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to place this up top and see where it sits with my filament. When your filament runs through the hole, it'll come out of that little hole there and run in between that and the gear. And I can see right off the bat that gear is sitting a little too low. So loosening up that screw will make it easier for you to see. Let's loosen that up a little bit. And bring it up. Check it again. Should be right around the middle of your gear. You want it as close to the middle. You want this guide to be as close to the middle of your gear as possible. And that is pretty much dead on. So I'm happy with that, which means at this point we can crank this down. And you want to make sure this is tight. These do have a way of working loose. I don't know if it's vibration or what, but I have seen them pop off. I have seen them slide. So you don't want to strip them out. So be very careful, but you do want them on there. Next thing we're going to do is bring this up top. Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. I just prefer to put the assembly together first. And just put the screw on enough that I know I'm not going to strip it by putting a little bit of pressure on it. Now, you're going to slide on your spring. And line it up. The set screw is going to do the rest. Now, this is a set screw or a tensioner screw. And that'll work its way through and should go right into your spring assembly. And as you can see, it's centering itself. Now, even though we're using the shorter spring, I bring it in just until it has some bite. And really, that's it. Then you can come back tighten that down. Your new assembly is done. That easy. And when you're all finished, this is what it should look like. The shorter spring is going to cause less tension on your filament, which will give less of a bite, but still more than the plastic assembly. And this aluminum is not going to crack on you as the plastic would. Now, the Bowden tube will come with new pneumatic couplers. This one's fine, but you'll have some extras because these do go bad. I had one go bad on me the other day, and you'll see it actually will move along. It's pretty funny to actually watch, but not funny when it happens. So our plug is facing backwards, our assembly's together, our gear is lined up, everything's good here. We can turn our attention to the other side of the machine. Now, back at the front of our machine, the first thing you're going to want to do is take your extruder, and I can tell you this is eccentric nut on the bottom. There is one on the bottom of your hot end, is tight. I can feel the way it's sliding, and it has nothing to do with the tension. I can actually feel some bumpiness, and you want to get that out right away. When you see people talk about wheel dust, that comes from the eccentric nut, and I'll show you that. But right now, let's focus on our Bowden tubing. This one here actually doesn't look bad. So what I like to do is take a piece of filament, that I know is good, and run it through. Why am I doing this? Because I can see where the filament stops, if it stops. Now right there, I feel a lot of resistance. And I can see, using the black filament on the white tube, that right here, it's stopping for some reason. Okay, well, that's enough of a reason for me to pull this tube. Now, pulling the tube is no big deal. You're just going to take your snips. You don't even have to cut this off. You can usually just slide in a new one if it's not too tight. But something is causing this to jam. And mind you, like I said in the very beginning, this stuff is not quality controlled the way it used to be. And this is interesting. Pneumatic coupler is actually really jammed up there. Okay. That Bowden tube should pull right out. It's not, so let's take it to the next step. Hold your extruder, and wow, that was loose. Okay, let's see what we got here. And I can see it's got a really, really good bite on this Bowden tube. Well, it was never used. That's good. But something's causing the pneumatic coupler to grip too hard. And that was it. There was a piece of something right there that was keeping it from pushing down. So you should be able to push and pull this right out. I did have a really tight bite on that. Now going in from this side, I want to see if I hit that same blockage and where it was. And there is no blockage. It must have just been the tubing. Now while I'm out, the end is actually really not nice on this, so I am going to replace it. I have it ordered in the bag anyway. Otherwise I would run with this tube. It's just got a little bit of wear. It's cut a little uneven, which you really want to make sure the end that goes into your hot end is cut even, and you can even see very carefully, if I can focus, there's some particles that are coming out of the inside, and it was just in the cutting of the tube. Remember, it's not like somebody is sitting there in the factory hand cutting this, making sure it's precise. it's a machine, and we can't fault the machines that are cutting tens of thousands of these a day for not getting it right. So let's get a piece of Bowden tube in here. Okay, so now here's our Capricorn tubing. If you look at the end of this, you can see it's nice and clean. I know this is real Capricorn tubing, but that does not change anything for me, because exactly is the same as the white one. There could be issues. Now this is going in smooth as could be. I can tell you this is definitely a real Bowden tube, or a real Capricorn tube. Yeah, it's not biting anywhere. It's running in really smooth. So, okay, let's cut a piece of this to the proper length. Now, to measure out the proper length, if you noticed how long the white one was, that was way too long. This is really all you need to do. Go to where it is on your extruder. Go to where it should go down on your hot end. Give yourself a little extra, and that is all you need. Now let's take that and compare it with the white one. Holding them in the same spot, that's a big difference. So that's a lot more tubing than what we needed. So I'm going to cut this one down to size, and we'll install it. The nice thing is, when you have a Bowden cutter, you're going to get a nice straight edge on both sides. But what's good about this kit that we purchased for $20 with all these accessories in is you have enough Capricorn tubing for 2 printers, or 2 printers and a direct drive, to be honest with you. Okay, so let's get this installed. And it's just reversing the process, and it's really easy. But there is some contention to this. Do you insert your Capricorn tube first, or do you set this in, your pneumatic holder in first? There's a big debate on this, because this can cause mushrooming of the tube. Now that's not so much of a factor with good PTFE tubing like the Capricorn, or there are some other brands. I know everybody says Capricorn, 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 but that is just the default. And what you do is tighten this down. And again, no need to over tighten. Take it, push down, and push it all the way through. Now, if this was a used machine, meaning if I had used it before, I would actually pop off the nozzle, run it through. But as this is a brand new machine, it's really not necessary to do all that. And let's just get our clip into place, and that's going to hold this just fine. And as you can see, we have plenty of meat left on this end that goes all the way to the end. And that's really how I measure it, all the way to the end of your extruder, even though you only need it to go in about that far. That just gives you a little extra play in the tube, but not too much that it's going to make a difference in your printing. The next thing we're going to do is come up to this side and do the same thing. Push in, push this all the way through. Nice and tight, and give them a little tug. Don't be afraid to pull on this, because pneumatic couplers do go bad, and I've gotten brand new ones that are bad. So that 2-second little test can make the difference between a print failure and a problem down the line, or a smooth first print, and printing from there on forward. Now you'll notice that these are the one for the aluminum, if I could speak correctly. For the aluminum extruder is a bigger fitting. It's the same size as on your hot end, so it actually has more of a bite. Now we're good here. What we could do at this point is connect our cable ties over, but I'm going to show you something with that. The next thing we're going to want to do is bring our gantry up and bring our gantry down. Now we're pretty low right now, so let's start on the downside. It's going down really easily. Bring it down to your limit switch. And you should hear it engage. And just take a look at your nozzle. Make sure it's far off where your build surface is. Now, holding the middle, and you don't need to put really upwards pressure. And turning your lead screw, you're going to bring this back up to the top. And what you're feeling for, again, is any binding. You're watching the wheels here and the wheels here. So let me move this over so you guys can see. We want to make sure that there's good contact on both sides of the rail, of the gantry rail. So these wheels are spinning evenly. That's going to let me know that the frame is even. Now, we can get into squares and whatnot, and for printers like the Ender 3V2, that can be an issue. On printers like this, not really much so, because they come pre-assembled. Okay, now we have our assembly up top. I'm getting some dropping, if you see. Well, that's due to the eccentric nuts. And I've gone over this before, but an eccentric nut assembly is a wheel that is on an off-center, meaning it can turn this way and push up top pressure or bottom pressure. This side, you always want to be at its lowest point, pushing up. Now, visibly to the eye, you're not going to see much. But what that's going to do is pretty much instantly level this out and give you a lot of stability. I know people suffer sometimes from sag on this axis, but with your stock hot end, you're really not going to have to. If you have a direct drive and everything, you could have some sagging, but nothing here should cause you enough weight for that to sag. And let me get that adjusted up for you. I spun the printer around to make this a little easier for you to see. This wheel is on an eccentric nut assembly. This wheel I want at the lowest point pushing upwards that it can be, which means I'm going to turn this. See how it's turning down and wanting to go down on me? I can tell you that that's in the upward position. Now, if you see very carefully, this wheel has been rolling downwards. See how it's rolling down? You want to get it to where it goes from tight to free and then starts tightening up on you again. Now, you're going to try and wobble it until the whole machine wobbles with it. Now look, I can put my finger, I can put pressure, and it's a lot harder to make this go down. And that's really it for eccentric nut assemblies. Now, I can tell you, without even really testing it, but I'm going to for you, is that the distance is going to be the same just by adjusting that eccentric nut. Now, to level this, I get this question a lot. How do you properly level your gantry? Make sure it's right. Well, it's easy. Take something that you know is square, slide it in, keep tension on the Z-axis. That should slide through. If you can hear that friction. Now I want to hear that same friction over here. And there it is. My gantry's leveled. That's how easy it is to level a gantry. You don't need squares, this, that, the other thing. Yes, a metal square or a metal piece or a printed part, whatever, can do the exact same thing. But all you want is something the same size that will slide between here and here at the same friction it will on the other side against the top rail. And I can tell you right straight off that I know this is completely leveled. So now the next thing we're going to do is looking at the back of the machine is something that a lot of people overlook, and I still get questions about this, and I still see videos. In fact, I just saw a video with somebody who printed for a year and a half without knowing about this. First, we're going to wobble our hot end, and this one is not wobbling. And as it is a new machine, it's probably not going to wobble, and that's because of this eccentric nut being over tightened for shipping. And it was. So what we're going to do is just back that off a little bit. And you can see that just by backing it off, that wobble, adjusting the eccentric nut. Okay. No wobble, and go a little bit past that. Just a little bit, not even a quarter turn. And there you go. That's it. Now I know my hot end is going to be nice and stable. At this point, you're going to want to take your Allen key and make sure that wheel is tightened down. Usually it's going to be about a quarter turn to a half turn. Now, I want to be able to roll this wheel, and roll this wheel by hand and have that assembly move. Now I know that those wheels are all touching the bed, all touching the gantry, which means I am going to have a smooth, clean print. Coming over to the extruder side, I want to show you guys something. Now, having the aluminum extruder is great, but you lose one thing, and that is the cable management that was on the plastic one. Now, these usually break anyway, but they're still nice to have. Come to the rescue was Greg191134, who made this CR-10 filament guide. It keeps your filament off of your Z-screw, but it also gives you back your cable management. What's really nice about this is it snaps into place. It doesn't take any effort. It goes over these two screws, so it's actually not screwed in. And it gives you back your cable management, and it keeps your filament off of your Z-screw. Fantastic design. There's going to be a link in the description. But it's Thingiverse file 2186253. Awesome add-on. I wish some printer manufacturers or upgrade manufacturers would make a deal and make this in metal. Now, this next part goes without saying to those of us with 3D printing experience. With those of us that don't, keep all of your extra parts, save them, put them in a Ziploc bag, and put them into a drawer. C-nuts are invaluable, thumb screws, any of these parts you will probably need at some point down the line, and it's good to start assembling a collection. Now, all we have to do is attach the 2 thumb screws, which should be the only 2 parts remaining for your machine besides for your cable ties, and we're going to get to that next because cable management is really important on these machines. I know a lot of people like drag chains. I thought they were great too. I thought it was just a cool thing. I did not realize the amount of stress it put on the motor. So I definitely am not for that anymore. These machines really need their cabling to be able to run freely. And in all honesty, if you have it run right, you won't have any issues. So that's it. That's our new spool holder mounted up on top of our power board. Now, before you do anything further than mounting that spool holder, come around to this side and you're going to have a switch. It's going to say 230 or 115. Here in the US we use 115, so I made sure that's switched over. Now I have no fear of running this machine with the wrong voltage. But if you're unsure, always check that. Check it again, and check it again, just to make sure that 115 is there. It's an easy thing to overlook. It is pointed out in most instruction manuals, but still, with the level of importance, it's worth drilling it in. Now, let's move on to our cable management system and what we're going to use to deal with it. Okay, back to the front of our machine. Now, the first thing you're going to do cable management wise is, remember we put this into the back of our new filament guide. Let's pop that out, and you're going to add your first cable tie about here. No need to over tighten anything, just enough that it's not going to slide around. Now when you clip your cable ties, seriously clip them flush, because you don't want them to cut into any of your wiring or filament or anything of this sort. Now I know this is just tedious, but it's worth going over because I've seen a lot of machines with wiring essentially everywhere. And what you're going to want to do is keep your Bowden tube, no matter the type, along the same axis. If it's riding on the inside, you want it to ride on the inside. And really, you only need 3 up here. Your third one's going to go, right about here. About the same distance from as the one from your hot end. This makes it easier if you have to remove anything down the line. And it's also going to smooth the movement of your machine, as your cable and your Bowden tube are going to be moving at the same time. So there you go. Everything's set up there. That's clip flush. So now this we can take and clip back in to our new cable management system filament holder or filament guide, which, man, I wish they made in steel, but I've never had one break. Now, okay, there's a few things that we can do, and I'm going to show you some optional accessories. First of which is going to be your manual adjustment knob for your Z-axis. Now, this is really important to keep your hands off of your Z-axis lead screw. And there's really not much to it. It's by Bash Z, and it's Thingiverse file 2534990. And it also has the insert. Now this, let me reposition the camera a little bit. This would go and replace this. It has a bigger hole. And the knob will screw onto the Z-axis. Now, as you can see, I have one on my CR-10 Mini up there, but the shelf that the ears are going on has about yay much clearance, so I'm not going to be adding it to this machine. However, on this end of the machine, I'm going to pop this end cap off, and I am going to install this tool holder. It's marked with a Creality logo. It has micro SD card slots, the holder for your micro SD reader, holders for your hex heads, and for a spade, as well as for a pair of snips. It's always good to have these on hand. This one I'm only going to be using for the micro SD cards and the snip holders, as I like to keep one of them by every machine. And as you can see, that smoothly and easily snaps right on the top corner of your machine. Very nice looking assembly, and it holds all your tools. Before we hook up the electronics though, there is one more nut, one more eccentric nut that we have to adjust, and that's this one here. And it's between your extruder assembly and the rail. You're going to check to feel these two wheels here. You do not want those wheels to spin freely, and if they are or seem too tight, this is the nut you have to adjust. Now I just adjusted this into position, so I know that this side is square here, this side is square here. All of my wheels are snug, nothing is spinning freely, which is perfect. You want your machine dialed in as perfectly as possible before you hook up any electronics. And that's what we're going to do right now, is just plug a few things in. These three sections are for a different part. You're going to have your E, which is your extruder, with your X. You're going to have your Y, and that's going to be both together. And you're going to have your Z's, which will both be together as well. Let's start with the E. The E plugs right into the back of your extruder, and you can see now why we turn the motor around. And the large X goes right into the bottom here, and the small one goes to the inside. Now let's move down to our Z. And your Z cable goes into that limit switch there, and right there. And coming around to the back of your machine, there's your two Ys. So now all your wiring is hooked up there. You want your bed cable free. You want this free, not tied into your cable management. Voltage at 115. Machine plugged in. And let's see what happens. That is the best sound in the world. We got Creality. Let's see what happens. Creality Mini ready. Okay, great. Notice I have no build surface on this. I am doing this for a reason. And remember I tightened down those bed screws? That's because limit switches can go bad, and they can be bad right from the factory. So if I was to have a glass bed on here and didn't lower my springs all the way, I could drill that nozzle right through a glass bed. So now that I know I'm playing it safe, prepare, auto home. Ready? So it looks like our axes are all good. Everything's moving exactly how it should. Our limit switches are working. Now we just have to wait for the last limit switch, which is going to be our Z stop. So when it hits that, it's going to do one of two things. It's going to grind like crazy if it's bad, or stop as soon as it's touched. And it stopped. Machine is auto-homed. Perfect. Okay, so this machine is ready to rock and roll. So tonight I am going to be doing a live Q&A. So when it comes to calibration, bed adhesion, what is the best build surface for different materials, as there are many. These are a lot of questions that you guys give to me constantly, and I want to answer them through you live. So I have assembled a good amount of questions, and I'll be taking more live, and we can talk about any of the different machines, any of the different build surfaces, any of the different filaments, whatever you want to discuss, whatever questions you have. I'll be live at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. Like, subscribe, and if you want to get notified for that, hit the little notification bell.